Hello, I'm Bob Trubshaw. I'd like to talk to you today about why early churches were often in the loops of rivers, and why that's a continuation of a worldview which plausibly goes back to the Neolithic. In a previous video, I tried to explain the various reasons why early churches were located near water, and that they were often on land sticking out into loops of rivers. Among other advantages, such loops create sediment on the inside of the bends, allowing flat-bottom boats to be beached for loading and unloading. But, as this video will attempt to describe, such loops also allow fascinating tricks of light, which seem to have been thought of as numinous. At least some of such loops were the locations of pre-Christian sacred sites. And the reason for this links back to a different earlier video, the one called Beside Not Above, in particular the idea of elfshine, something shimmering and deceptive. Put simply, on a day when there's some sunshine breaking through the clouds, then sunlight reflects off the surface of water, and flowing water is likely to be rippling, at least slightly, so the reflection of the sunlight shimmers. Yes, I know this happens all along a river on a suitably sunny day, but standing in the loop of a river means you don't have to move to see this effect. Instead, you just turn around slightly to whichever direction the sun is shining from. For many years I took part in annual druid camps which were held in the loops of rivers. One of the camps used a hilltop on the edge of the Forest of Dean, surrounded on three sides by a loop of the Severn, and the other was in a loop of the Wye, about 8 miles west of Hereford. These are some photographs taken from the loop in the Wye. And when the river level drops, it's also possible to walk out onto some rocks and stand in the middle of the watercourse. This is a photograph of the sunlight reflecting off a lake in Wales. Not just any lake, but Llyn-Gerionedd. Llyn-Gerionedd is small, less than a mile long, an area of 45 acres, never any deeper than 50 feet. Yet, in Welsh mythology, its modest size is not indicative of its importance. Gerionedd combines the Welsh word gerio, which means to enunciate a phrase, with nithu, which has the sense of spinning. So this lake is the lake of weaving and telling stories, or lake language, as Michael Damus put it in his book Taliesin's Travels. There's one story which was enunciated and spun, which is inextricably linked to Llyn-Gerionedd. It is where Gwion Bach, little Gwion, transformed into Taliesin, the bright-browed. The connection with Taliesin infers that Llyn-Gerionedd is both an endless source of stories ever being spun out and woven together. But perhaps we should follow that back, and also think of Llyn-Gerionedd as the place where language was first revealed. And bear in mind that in many traditional cultures, languages were thought of as divine revelations, which, at least in mythic thinking, makes Llyn-Gerionedd akin to a bubbling cauldron from which Awen, the mists or spirit of poetic inspiration, continually arise. Giraldus Cambriensis, in his 12th century description of Wales, stated that among the Welsh there are certain individuals called Aweniddion. We could translate that as the spinners of Awen, an idea which would be very much akin to notions of endless creativity which are key to Chinese and other Asian cultures. These 12th century Aweniddion prophesied by going into a trance and speaking incoherently, or speaking in tongues. The Awen or Aweniddion is synonymous with poetic inspiration. Without Awen, Taliesin would not have been a legendary bard. Taliesin was in no doubt that he obtained Awen from the cauldron of Caridwen. Those familiar with Scandinavian lore will know that mead is the drink of inspiration for Scandinavian poets or skalds, and the same can be said for Irish lore. We now know that mead contains alcohol, and generally accept that a moderate amount of alcohol aids loquaciousness, if not always inspired creativity. Alcohol is colourless, so invisible in a liquid. It's still invisible when distilled. But this hidden spirit of inspiration is why we collectively refer to gin, whisky, brandy and other distilled alcoholic drinks as spirits. Indeed, the English word gin is from the Arabic word jinn, which means the spirit. It was, of course, the Arabic world which first developed the distillation process, and why the English word alcohol is from the Arabic alcohol. Let's return to Taliesin. Taliesin could be thought of as a later manifestation of the Romano-British deity called Belatacodros, whose name means something like the bright, beautiful one. This Roman altar was found at Kirkbridge, just to the south of Bowness. The inscription starts, Deo Belato Cairo. Archaeological evidence for Belatacodros is mostly from Cumbria. Bear in mind, Cumbria was once as Welsh as Wales. Indeed, the name Cumbria is from the same word Cymru that Welsh speakers used to refer to Wales. And the Brythonic language, which evolved into modern Welsh, was of course once spoken in Cumbria just as much as in modern Wales. However, while Belatacodros was associated by the Romans with Mars, so must have been a war god, Taliesin was, and still is, principally regarded as a poet and bard. Belatacodros and Taliesin might best be thought of as demi-gods, but a number of more divine beings were also associated with being bright. In the Scandinavian pantheon, this attribute is associated with Balder. Among the Greek gods, it is Apollo. No surprise, as Apollo is one of the many sun gods from around the world. The halos and nimbuses, which became part of early Christian iconography when depicting Christ and the apostles and archangels, are a continuation of this same symbolic brightness. Clive Tolley, in his book on Shamanism in Norse myth and magic, discusses white as a synonym for holy. His examples including white loam being special significance in the sagas, notably the white mud associated with the spring of Uther. The one clear parallel in Anglo-Saxon times is the Virgin Mary being associated with white. We're more familiar with depictions where she's dominated by a heavenly blue, but that comes later. This same association with whiteness is retained by St. Bridget, otherwise known as Bride. This infers that pre-conversion female saints, such as Bridget, manifested their holiness as whiteness. To this day, white is regarded as a holy colour. White clothes are worn for baptism and confirmation. The brightness, the intense whiteness of candle flames retains this sense of holiness and can be recognised in the flames of the ubiquitous votive candles at shrines throughout the world. Candlemas on the 2nd of February is very much a festival of light, as is the Swedish festival of St. Lucia, held on the 13th of December. Both are seemingly continuations of pre-conversion celebrations. One of the tales attributed to Taliesin includes an account of King Seath-Enin. His name combines Seath, 7, with Enini, which has the specific sense of flickering or shimmering light. Literally, it means self-kindling, but is mostly used metaphorically. Seath-Enin's name is an allusion to the 7 stars, as Seath-Enin creates a giant mirror to reflect the heavens. Whether the 7 stars are the Plough or the Pleiades is not clear from the tale, but the Pleiades do appear to shimmer and are conventionally deemed to comprise of 7 stars, although since the invention of telescopes, its asterism is known to have many more than 7 stars. The corresponding word to Enini in Old English seems to be elfshine, which translates as otherworldly reflections, with connotations of deceptive appearances. I've discussed elfshine in the Beside Not Above video. In a different video, the one called the G.K. Chesterton School of History, I discuss how the Anglo-Saxons had a word leek, which meant potency, but was thought of as something which permeated the world without ever being directly seen. A bit like the way gravity influences everything, but can't be directly perceived. Just perhaps sunlight shimmering on water was thought to be one of the occasions when leek could be seen, or was thought of as the Arwen of inspiration. A little bit of digital tweaking allows me to give the impression that the sunlight is shimmering on Llyngerioneth. Is this phenomena the main sense of the Welsh word enini? No apologies for there being so many cross-references to other videos. The ideas in this video were woven together from a variety of strands of prior research. And the nature of YouTube videos and the need to aim for about 10 to 20 minutes duration means I can only present one or two facets at a time. For comparison, a single chapter in a book would have about 3 or 5 times as many ideas as a single video, while a whole book would need at least 30 10-minute videos. And I've written rather a lot of books in the last 35 years. The sun reflects off water most dramatically at sunrise and sunset, but the direction of sunrise and sunset changes almost continually throughout the year, but not when you stand in the loop of a river. I've rather flippantly repurposed the term U-bend for the title of this video. It would be more accurate to describe the topography as an S-bend. Standing in the middle of such a bend would mean that the sunrise or sunset would reflect dramatically off some part of the watercourse, well, at least on days when there was little or no cloud. We know that at least some pre-conversion sacred groves were in loops of rivers. For example, Barrow-on-Soar in Leicestershire takes its name not from Barrow, a burial mound, but from Beru, which means sacred grove. Take away late 18th century changes to the river course, and the distinctive loop in the River Soar becomes more apparent. Vast amounts of Anglo-Saxon pottery were recovered from what is now a caravan park, and this seems to be because the sacred grove evolved into a major trading centre with pottery production workshops, but so far no archaeological evaluation of the site has taken place. A friend, Michel Axe, has identified another pre-Christian ritual site in a loop of the River Dee in North Wales. However, I've yet to visit this location. Interestingly, the name of the River Dee comes from a local goddess who might be thought of as the Queen of the Valley. I've uploaded a previous video that's specifically called Queens of the Valleys, which goes into more detail. Just perhaps this loop in the Dee was the focus of worship to this goddess of sovereignty. Looking at the sun reflecting off an S-bend would be akin to looking at a scintillating golden oxbow, or maybe something even more animated, such as a golden serpent. This is entirely consistent with St. Patrick allegedly driving the servants out of Ireland, and the similar activities of lesser-known missionaries elsewhere in the British Isles. Is this less a literal description, and more a metaphor for the repurposing of pre-Christian sacred sites overlooking S-bends? Clearly sunrise was important to early Christians, as once religious rites took place in churches, with services held early in the mornings, then east-facing windows created their own sense of splendour. Architecture rather than topography produced similar drama. This was greatly enhanced once the apertures were glazed with stained glass. To this day, the east window of a church is almost always the location for the most impressive stained glass. For more about the significance of sunrise, then take a look at my Ringed Horizons video. As I described in a web article uploaded in 2013, I'll include a link in the description below. Given the importance of wyrmas in Anglo-Saxon thinking, I suspect that further research would reveal that serpentine watercourses are just one way in which wyrma manifested in the landscape. In case you're wondering, the Anglo-Saxon notion of wyrmas was not just worms, but a whole miscellany of wriggling creatures of various sizes, which mostly live underground. Wyrmas were the precursors to later notions of dragons and wyverns. This 12th century font in Avebury in Wiltshire shows a bishop seemingly suppressing 2 serpent-like wyverns or wyrmas. Why is this relevant? Because many early churches are in dramatic S-bends of rivers. One is Norwich, and another is Sockburn in County Durham. And these 2 places have something else in common. Both places are associated with dragons. Or in the case of Sockburn, it was the Sockburn worm which was slain, and just up the road at Lambton another worm met its fate. Both tales plausibly predate the Norman conquest in 1066, although of course the earliest surviving documents are from much later. So far as we know, no dragons or worms were slain in Norwich, but Snapdragon was a firm favourite among the crowds who gathered to celebrate St. George's Day. He even survived the Reformation. His last incarnation, an elaborate tourney horse, is preserved in Norwich Museum. Something of the sense of Old English shin and Welsh heniny seems to have filtered down right to the 15th century. And as my friend Ian Brown recognised, in the Arthurian tales composed by Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century, shiny objects enthrall or enchant several of the knights. For example, Lancelot set his sword up as a cross, staring at its bright surface and seeing a vision of the Grail procession. Galahad achieves a kind of apotheosis when looking into the brightness of the Grail, while Percival becomes absorbed in staring at drops of red blood in bright white snow. These photographs you're looking at were taken at a druidic midwinter ritual on Beacon Hill in Charnwood Forest in 2007. There are two swords in use. The one planted tip first in the ground clearly catches the midsummer sun. The other sword, held by Michelle Axe, who's wearing a green robe, is a replica of Excalibur made for John Boorman's film called Excalibur. These shiny and reflective swords contributed to a dramatic midwinter rite around the beacon, which was also brightly shining. Legends and folk customs do not offer conclusive evidence that S-bends were once thought of as wyrmas, but the evolution of topographical features into first a supernatural phenomena and then a highly distorted legend and custom is, well, far from improbable. Terms such as U-bend and S-bend are, of course, anachronistic. Their designation as wyrmasbend would better reflect the Elfshine or Enini at these locations.